Mark Davis woke up to find his car illegally towed by an HOA he wasn't even part of. At the center of it all, a power-hungry HOA president who thought she could expand her rule beyond legal boundaries, enforcing made-up laws with smug confidence. But Mark wasn't about to roll over. He came back with the law on his side, ready to turn the tables. And trust me, the way this all unraveled, you won't believe how satisfying it was to watch justice finally hit back. Mark Davis pulled into his driveway, the familiar hum of his engine settling into silence as he shifted into park. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair, exhaustion pressing against his skull like a dull, lingering headache. It had been one of those days, the kind where every email felt like a personal attack. Every meeting had lasted twice as long as it should have, and every idiot on the road had seemingly been assigned to his specific route home just to personally test his patience. He had exactly one plan for the evening: dump his work bag inside the front door, grab a beer, order something fried and unhealthy, and proceed to rot on the couch until his body forced him into sleep. No stress, no problems, no unnecessary social interactions, just pure, blissful, uninterrupted nothingness. But as he reached for the door handle, his eyes snagged on something wrong: a blindingly bright piece of paper plastered to his windshield, the kind of yellow designed to ruin someone's day. Mark's stomach tightened instinctively. A ticket? Here? He frowned, stepping out of the car, already running through every possible reason someone could have had to put a notice on his vehicle. Parking violation? No. Street sweeping? Nope. Expired tags? No way. He had lived in this house for 5 goddamn years without ever getting so much as a warning for anything. As far as he knew, the only thing remotely illegal on his property was probably the amount of takeout containers stacked up in his kitchen. And yet, here it was, that aggressive yellow paper flapping slightly in the breeze, taunting him. His frown deepened as he yanked it free from under the windshield wiper, the cheap paper crinkling sharply in his grip. He unfolded it, eyes scanning the blocky, bolded text at the top. Notice of violation. Your vehicle is not in compliance with neighborhood standards. You have 24 hours to remove it before it is towed at your expense. Sincerely, the HOA Board. Mark stared at the paper. Then he reread it. Then he read it again, slower this time, just to make sure he wasn't experiencing some kind of post-work delusion. HOA? His brain froze. What HOA? His neighborhood didn't have a goddamn homeowners association. That was the whole point of buying this house. No overpriced HOA fees. No absurd rules about what shade of beige his mailbox had to be. No retired busybodies on a power trip knocking on his door to complain about his grass being half an inch too long. Mark had specifically chosen to live in a place where he could exist in peace without someone policing his every decision. And yet, here he was, holding an HOA violation, like he had somehow teleported into an alternate universe where he had agreed to be governed by a bunch of clipboard-carrying, rule-obsessed suburban tyrants. His fingers tightened around the edges of the paper as his mind raced. There was no explanation, no mention of what exactly his car was violating, no specific rule referenced, just a vague accusation and a ticking clock. A threat. Mark's pulse spiked. He turned sharply, his gaze sweeping across the street, scanning for anyone that looked remotely suspicious. Everything looked normal. A couple of houses down, the Johnsons were out walking their ridiculous little Pomeranian, the tiny dog strutting like it owned the entire damn neighborhood. Across the street, some teenager was shooting hoops in his driveway, missing every single shot, but still doing the celebration jog like he was about to be drafted into the NBA. Karen from next door was unloading groceries from her SUV, her husband standing beside her, doing exactly nothing, except occasionally lifting a single grocery bag to pretend he was helping. Same quiet, boring suburbia. And yet, someone had been watching. Someone had decided they were in charge. Someone had looked at his car, his driveway, his property, and thought, yeah, I have the right to control that. Mark's jaw tightened. It didn't feel like a mistake. If this had been some random paperwork mix-up, there would have been a note, a clarification, something. But there wasn't. There was just a demand, a presumptuous, arrogant, overreaching demand. And the more he thought about it, the more pissed off he got. If some self-important HOA board member thought they could expand their jurisdiction to include his house, his property, his life, then they were in for a rude-ass awakening. Because Mark wasn't the type to roll over and take it. His fingers curled into a fist, the violation crumpling in his grip. Oh, they picked the wrong guy. The next morning, Mark stepped out of his house, coffee in one hand, keys in the other, already bracing himself for another long workday. The early morning sun cast long shadows over his driveway, the air still carrying that crisp freshness, before the day turned into a humid mess. He took a sip of coffee, eyes narrowing as he approached his car. That goddamn HOA violation from yesterday still lingered in the back of his mind, grating on his nerves like an itch he couldn't scratch. He had half a mind to crumple it up and shove it in their mailbox later, preferably lit, on fire. But the moment he turned the corner of his driveway, all thoughts of passive-aggressive revenge vanished. Because standing right next to his car was a group of people who had absolutely no business being there. A woman in her 50s, dressed in a stiff, no-nonsense business suit, stood with her arms folded across her chest. Her entire demeanor screamed corporate arrogance, the kind of person who spent their free time making PowerPoint presentations about community values. Beside her stood two other HOA members, both dressed in the same vaguely smug, self-important way. One was a man in a polo shirt that was tucked in way too tightly, the other a woman clutching a clipboard like it was the source of her power. But the real kicker? A tow truck, parked right there, idling like a goddamn executioner. And standing next to it was a tow truck driver in uniform, arms crossed, waiting for the go-ahead like he was about to put down a rabid animal. Mark's stomach dropped. Then his blood boiled. The woman in the suit tilted her head slightly, and then, in the most casual, matter-of-fact voice possible, pointed at his car and said, "That's the one." Mark snapped forward. "Hey!" His voice cut through the morning air, sharp and furious. The woman turned slowly, her expression completely unreadable. If she was surprised, she didn't show it. If anything, she looked mildly amused. Mark stormed toward them, the coffee in his hand forgotten. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded, jabbing a finger toward the tow truck. The woman studied him for a moment, then shifted her gaze lazily back to his car. "Your vehicle does not comply with the HOA's regulations." Her tone was calm, clipped, patronizing. "We warned you yesterday, Mr. Davis." Mark let out a short, incredulous laugh. "You warned me? Lady, I don't know if you have a reading comprehension problem, but let me say this real slow. I am not in your goddamn HOA." She didn't even blink. "If you live in this neighborhood, you're expected to follow our community guidelines." The way she said it, slow, deliberate, condescending, made something snap inside Mark. He felt his pulse pound in his ears. "Oh, is that how it works?" His voice dripped with sarcasm as he threw his hands in the air. "I guess laws and property rights don't mean shit anymore because the almighty HOA has decided to extend their imaginary empire." The woman's lips curled into the faintest, most infuriating smile. "You still don't seem to understand how things work around here, Mr. Davis." That was it. That right there, that tone, that smug, self-righteous attitude of someone who thought they were untouchable, someone who was so used to getting their way that they didn't even consider the possibility that someone might actually fight back. Mark took a step forward, standing close enough that he could see the subtle twitch in her expression when she realized he wasn't just some pushover. "Then enlighten me." His voice was low, cold. "What exact rule am I violating?" The woman barely hesitated. "It's in the HOA bylaws." Mark barked out a short, humorless laugh. "I don't give a shit what's in your bylaws. I never signed up for them. I never agreed to them. And I sure as hell don't owe you a goddamn thing." The woman's smile widened slightly, like a teacher dealing with a particularly slow student. "Well, that's where you're mistaken." She tilted her head. "You see, some of us believe in maintaining the integrity of the neighborhood, and whether you like it or not, our standards apply to everyone." Mark could feel the veins in his temple throbbing. This was insane. This wasn't just about some made-up parking rule. This wasn't even about an overreaching HOA. This was about control. These people had gotten so drunk on their own authority, so used to bullying their way into power, that they thought they could just make up new laws as they went along. And worst of all, they thought he would just go along with it. Mark inhaled sharply, nostrils flaring, his hands curled into fists at his sides. No, they picked the wrong guy. Mark's phone vibrated aggressively on his nightstand, the screen lighting up the dark room. He groggily reached for it, squinting at the notification. Your vehicle has been towed by the HOA for non-compliance with community standards. Mark bolted upright. No way. His heart slammed against his ribs as he read it again. They actually took his car? A wave of pure, blinding fury surged through him. He threw off his blanket, grabbed his phone, and immediately dialed the towing company. A woman answered in a bored monotone. Citywide towing. How can I... Where is my car? Mark's voice came out low and lethal. The woman sighed, like she'd done this 100 times. License plate number? He rattled it off. Silence. Then, yep, it was towed this morning. Mark's fists clenched. Who authorized it? HOA violation, standard protocol. Mark saw red. I am not in their HOA. Another pause, then the same emotionless response. If you have a complaint, you can take it up with the HOA board. Fine, how much to get it back? More typing. $500. Mark almost broke his phone in half. $500? Impound fee. Mark hung up mid-sentence, storming the HOA office. By the time he reached the HOA building, he was seeing white-hot rage. He threw the door open, ignoring the startled receptionist, and marched straight for the back office. And there she was, the same smug woman from yesterday, sitting behind a polished desk like she was the queen of suburbia. She looked up as he stormed in, completely unfazed. Mr. Davis, good morning. Mark slammed his hands onto her desk. Where is my car? She didn't even blink. It was removed due to non-compliance. We warned you. Mark's hands curled into fists. I'm not in your HOA. Her lips curled into a smile. That doesn't matter. Mark went deadly still. She knew. She knew she had no authority over him, and she didn't care. His voice dropped into something dangerously quiet. You have no idea what you've just started. 2 days later, Mark returned to the battlefield. But this time, he didn't come alone. As he stepped through the glass doors of the HOA office, he was flanked by 2 uniformed cops and his lawyer, a shark in a tailored suit with a face that practically screamed, I'm here to ruin your life. The air inside the office shifted immediately. The smug, passive-aggressive energy that usually radiated from these people, gone. Replaced with stiffened postures, nervous glances, and the unmistakable scent of, oh shit, we messed up. The receptionist, the same one who had sneered at him 2 days ago like he was some unruly child, froze mid-keystroke, her eyes darting between the cops and Mark, her mouth slightly open, like she was about to call security. But security was already here, and then there she was, the queen of the HOA, sitting at her oversized desk, fingers neatly laced together, expression carefully composed. But Mark saw it, that tiny flicker of fear in her eyes. She knew. She knew the game was over. Mark didn't give her the chance to speak. Before she could even open her lying mouth, one of the officers strode forward and dropped a thick stack of legal documents onto her desk with a heavy thud. Ma'am, the officer said, his voice calm but absolutely final, you are being charged with unlawful possession of private property. The woman's face drained of color. The HOA has no legal authority over this residence, the officer continued, not giving her even a second to breathe. You had no right to tow his vehicle. You are also facing civil liability for attempted fraud and extortion. Silence. Mark could actually hear her swallow. Then his lawyer, polished, composed, and radiating the kind of quiet menace that made HOA board members have nightmares, stepped forward. You illegally seized my client's property and attempted to force him into an HOA agreement he never consented to, which is a direct violation of state homeowner rights. His voice was silk smooth and full of knives. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to release his vehicle immediately, you're going to compensate him for damages, and you're going to prepare for a lawsuit that will make sure this little overreach of authority costs you far more than your cushy little board position is worth." The woman's mouth opened and closed, her brain clearly short-circuiting. Her eyes darted between the cops, the lawyer, and Mark, as if searching for some loophole, some way out. But there wasn't one. She had fucked up, and she knew it. But, she stammered, blinking like a malfunctioning robot. Mark tilted his head. But, he mocked, his voice dripping with sarcasm and victory. Then, leaning forward just enough to make sure she felt the full weight of his next words, he smirked. "Where's my car, bitch?" She flinched. Actually flinched. Yeah, that's what he thought. The aftermath. A fall from power. 2 days later, Mark's car was exactly where it should be, back in his driveway. Untouched. Unticketed. Like it had never been taken at all. But HOA? They were in full damage control mode because they hadn't just lost. They had been obliterated. Mark's lawsuit, filed and executed to perfection. He didn't just get his car back. He walked away with $10,000 in compensation. The HOA board, scrambling, trying to bury the story, make it disappear, but they couldn't. Because the second word got out that they had illegally towed a car that wasn't even under their jurisdiction, their entire power structure collapsed. And the HOA queen, oh, she was done, fired, kicked off the board. Completely erased from the HOA's existence. And not with some quiet resignation either, with full public humiliation. Her name had become a neighborhood punchline. People whispered about her at the grocery store. She had gone from respected board president to that insane woman who got the HOA sued into oblivion. But the real cherry on top, the HOA itself was now a complete joke. Nobody took their violations seriously anymore. People just laughed at their notices before tossing them directly into the garbage. That iron-fisted rule they once held, shattered. And Mark won. Not just in court, not just financially. He crushed them. And damn, it felt good.